was a ragged band that followed in our footsteps.
It's a very hard thing to puzzle out, myself, how these things happen, what combination of personalities and sounds that people, taste.
When a man like David Gilmour speaks about his favorite guitar solos, it's not just nostalgia. It's a quiet confession from a soul that spent a lifetime translating emotion into sound. At 79, his words carry the weight of decades spent chasing tone, space, and meaning. You can almost hear the hum of an old tube amp as he speaks, a reminder that, in his world, silence is as sacred as the notes that break it. For those who've lived through the golden age of rock, David Gilmour isn't just another guitarist. He's the voice behind 1,000 wordless emotions, the architect of melodies that didn't need lyrics to make you feel, whether it was the aching cry of Comfortably Numb or the haunting reach of Shine. On You Crazy Diamond, his guitar didn't just play, it spoke. Every note was a conversation with the listener. Each sustain a heartbeat held just a little too long. Born in 1946 in Cambridge, Gilmour came of age in an era when music was still raw, unfiltered, and full of danger. He joined Pink Floyd in 1968, just as the band was losing its visionary founder, Syd Barrett. What followed wasn't just a career, it was a rebirth of sound itself. Gilmour brought to the band a sense of clarity, an emotional precision that turned chaos into cathedral. His playing wasn't about speed or flash. It was about feeling, about restraint, about understanding that the space between two notes could sometimes say more than 100. And through all those years, through the rise of psychedelic rock, the arena tours, the personal losses, and the quiet retirements, Gilmour remained what he always was, a student of the guitar. He listened as much as he played. He learned from those who came before, and he carried their voices into his own music with humility and grace. So, when David Gilmour finally revealed his 5 favorite guitar solos, it wasn't just a list. It was a life story told through 5 moments of sound, 5 performances that shaped the man whose tone became a language of its own. 1. B.B. King, The Thrill Is Gone. The first name David Gilmour mentioned carried the very soul of the blues, B.B. King. When Gilmour speaks of King, there's a tone of reverence, almost gratitude, like a man remembering the teacher who showed him how to feel before he learned how to play. He first heard B.B. King as a young man in the early 60s, when imported blues records began circulating through Britain's underground clubs. Amid the chaos of rock's growing volume, B.B.'s music stood out, clean, measured, deeply human. The Thrill Is Gone became Gilmour's guidepost, not because of its technical complexity, but because of its simplicity. B.B. didn't rush. He bent a single note, held it, and made the world stop for 3 seconds. Gilmour would later say that King taught him the value of patience, that feeling a note was more important than playing 100. In Pink Floyd's sound, you can hear that lesson echo. The aching bends in Comfortably Numb, the restraint in Time, the aching slide in Shine on You, Crazy Diamond. They all carry B.B.'s fingerprints. King played with conversation in mind. Gilmour inherited that voice and expanded it into vast emotional landscapes. It's not exaggeration to say that without B.B. King, there might never have been the David Gilmour tone, that singing sustain, that perfect marriage of space and sorrow. And though decades separated their generations, their intent was the same, to make the listener feel. B.B. once said, "Notes are expensive, spend them wisely." Gilmour took that to heart, and in doing so, built an entire legacy around emotional economy. 2. Jimi Hendrix, Little Wing. If B.B. King gave Gilmour control, Jimi Hendrix gave him freedom. Gilmour was 21 when he first saw Hendrix play live in London. He described it later as a revelation, like watching the rules of gravity being rewritten in real time. Hendrix wasn't playing the guitar, he was becoming it. Every chord shimmered, every feedback squeal became a part of the story. When Gilmour first heard Little Wing, he realized that emotion didn't always have to sound sad. Sometimes it could sound like flight. Hendrix's influence didn't make Gilmour louder, it made him braver. The experimental textures that would define Pink Floyd, the reversed tapes, the haunting reverb, the voice-like phrasing, were born from that moment of realization. Hendrix gave permission to explore, to color outside the lines, to make the guitar not just an instrument, but an atmosphere. But more than sound, Gilmour admired Hendrix's vulnerability. Little Wing isn't a display of technique, it's a love letter played through electricity. Gilmour connected to that sincerity. For him, the song wasn't about brilliance, it was about truth. That honesty became the foundation of Gilmour's own playing, where every solo feels like a confession. If you close your eyes and listen to Gilmour's solo on Comfortably Numb, you can hear the echo of Little Wing, that same upward reach towards something spiritual, something untouchable. Hendrix showed him that the guitar could cry, laugh, and dream, all in a single phrase. 3. Jeff Beck, "Cause we've ended as lovers." When David Gilmour spoke about Jeff Beck, you could sense both admiration and kinship. Two players who valued expression over exhibition. To Gilmour, Beck was the quiet master of tone, a man who could make a Stratocaster breathe. He first encountered Beck's work in the mid-60s, when the British guitar scene was exploding with competition and innovation. Yet, Beck was different. He didn't chase fame. He chased sound. When Gilmour first heard "Cause We've Ended as Lovers," he said it felt like hearing a human voice crying through the strings. That track became a template for emotional precision, how to say everything with barely a whisper. Gilmour admired Beck's control. Every bend was deliberate, every slide a sentence. He once remarked that Beck could make a single note tell an entire story, and that became a quiet mantra in Gilmour's own career. You can hear it in High Hopes, where the solo floats between melancholy and resolve, a balance Gilmour learned from Beck's phrasing. The two men would later share stages, mutual respect flowing between them, and while Beck was more mercurial and unpredictable, Gilmour was his emotional mirror, steady, patient, and deeply lyrical. Beck taught him that mastery wasn't about perfection, it was about personality. When you hear "Cause We've Ended as Lovers," you're not hearing technique, you're hearing restraint sculpted into beauty. That lesson never left Gilmour's hands. 4. Hank Marvin, "Apache," "The Shadows." Long before psychedelic lights and arena crowds, there was a teenage David Gilmour sitting beside a small record player, listening to Hank Marvin's "Apache." The Shadows were Britain's first guitar heroes, clean-cut, melodic, and effortlessly cool. For a young Gilmour, that was the sound of the future. Marvin's use of echo and tremolo would become a lifelong influence. Gilmour once said that hearing "Apache" made him realize that a guitar could sing. It didn't have to shout or race. It could glide like a voice carried on air. That single song shaped the architecture of Gilmour's melodic approach. You can trace its DNA directly into "Shine on You Crazy Diamond." He often credited Marvin with teaching him discipline, how to play with clarity. In an era when many players fought to fill every bar with notes, Hank left space. That sense of patience resonated deeply with Gilmour. It's the reason his solos feel timeless. He inherited Marvin's understanding that melody lives in the pauses as much as in the phrases. To listeners who grew up in the 1960s, Apache was the sound of possibility. For Gilmour, it was the seed from which his entire style grew. That pristine, echo-drenched tone that would one day define the sound of Pink Floyd. 5. Eric Clapton, "Crossroads," Cream, Live, 1968. The final name on Gilmour's list was a peer, a fellow Brit who helped shape the same musical revolution, Eric Clapton. While Gilmour admired Clapton's early blues work, it was Cream's live version of Crossroads that left the deepest mark. He remembered hearing it for the first time and feeling electrified by its energy, raw, unfiltered, and fearless. Clapton in those years was a force of nature, channeling the spirit of Robert Johnson through the roar of a Marshall stack. Gilmour didn't want to imitate that power, he wanted to understand it. What struck him wasn't just speed or tone, it was conviction. Every phrase in Crossroads sounded like a man trying to outplay his own soul. Gilmour would later say that Clapton taught him to mean every note. You can hear that sincerity in his work, solos that never waste a second, never reach for attention. In Time and Dogs, he captures that same urgency, that same purity of intent. While their styles diverged, Clapton rooted in blues grit, Gilmour in atmospheric grace. The connection was spiritual. Clapton showed that blues wasn't bound by tradition. It was a living emotion, adaptable to any era. Gilmour carried that truth into the cosmos of Pink Floyd, letting the blues breathe through space and sound. Each of these 5 choices, King, Hendrix, Beck, Marvin, and Clapton, formed a pillar of Gilmour's identity. From the patient phrasing of BB to the free spirit of Hendrix, the precision of Beck, the melody of Marvin, and the conviction of Clapton, they weren't just influences. They were the vocabulary of a man who turned feeling into form. Listening to the names David Gilmour chose, B.B. King, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Hank Marvin, and Eric Clapton, you begin to see a portrait, not of idols, but of ideals. Each of these players represents a different language of emotion. King taught him patience, Hendrix taught him imagination, Beck taught him control, Marvin taught him melody, and Clapton taught him conviction. Together, they shaped the emotional architecture of one of rock's most expressive guitarists. What ties them all together isn't flash or fame, it's sincerity. They each understood that the guitar could be a mirror for the human condition. For Gilmour, their influence was never about replication. It was about translation. He absorbed their spirits, then spoke in his own dialect, slower, more reflective, and filled with silence that said as much as the sound itself. If you've ever sat with a pair of headphones, eyes closed, letting Comfortably Numb carry you into that suspended moment where time stops, you've heard all 5 of these men in one voice. That's Gilmour's gift. He turned admiration into alchemy. He didn't just honor his heroes. He built his identity upon their lessons, crafting a sound that still feels ageless, even as he nears 80. At 79, David Gilmour no longer plays to prove anything. His hands move slower now, but with the precision of someone who's said all that needs to be said, and still finds new ways to whisper it. When he speaks of his favorite solos, it's less a list and more a letter of gratitude. Gratitude to those who lit the path before him, and to the countless players who found their way by following his tone in return. Because in truth, Gilmour's journey isn't just his own. It belongs to anyone who's ever sat alone in a dim room with a guitar, trying to make a single note mean something. He reminds us that music isn't about complexity, it's about honesty. And when you play honestly, age doesn't dull you, it refines you. He once said that the secret to great music is to play what you feel, not what you think. Maybe that's why, after all these years, his sound still moves us. Because feeling, real, unfiltered emotion, never goes out of tune. So when we listen to Gilmour talk about his favorite solos, we're not just hearing admiration. We're hearing the sound of a man looking back at his life and saying, "This is where I came from. This is who made me." And perhaps, for those of us who grew up with Dark Side of the Moon spinning on the turntable, that's what makes it beautiful. We were there when those notes first found air, and even now, all these years later, they still find us. David Gilmour's revelation isn't merely a nostalgic reflection, it's a reminder of what his era represented. The 1960s and 70s gave rise to a generation of players who valued emotion over perfection. Every solo, every tone, carried fingerprints and flaws, and that's what made it human. Gilmour's list is a time capsule of that truth. It tells us that the guitar, in its purest form, is not about speed or technique, but communication. A conversation between artist and listener that transcends decades. As long as that conversation continues, Gilmour's legacy, and the legacy of those 5 names, will never fade. They taught the world that a single note, played with purpose, can echo forever. You have to be careful not to lose the human touch. The guitar should sound like it's singing, and when it does, you've done your job. David Gilmour.